Far away from the bright centers of the galaxy, there was a world called Tiveran Prime. It was home to the Teveran Confederacy, an intelligent and peaceful race known for their tall silver bodies, gentle voices, and strong sense of honor. For centuries, they had lived in harmony with their neighbors, trading knowledge and building shining cities that floated over oceans of crystal blue water. They were not a violent people. They believed in diplomacy, science, and art more than war, but that peace could not last forever. One dark cycle, without warning, the stars above Tiveran Prime filled with ships that did not come in peace. The Zorak Dominion had arrived, a ruthless empire that conquered for power and resources. The Zorak were known across the galaxy for destroying everything they couldn't control. Their fleets were massive, their technology brutal, and their hearts cold. They wanted the rich mineral core of Tiveran Prime, and they didn't care how many lives stood in their way. At first, the Tiveran tried to negotiate. Their diplomats sent messages offering trade, tribute, even shared technology. But the Zorak didn't answer with words, and they answered with fire. The first attack came at dawn. Thousands of energy beams rained down from orbit, turning entire cities into fields of glass. The skies burned red. The oceans boiled where bombardment struck. Millions of Tiveran were gone in hours. The Confederacy's defense fleet scrambled to fight back, but they were outmatched. Their ships were built for exploration, not war. When their first fleet fell, the Tiveran leaders refused to surrender. They believed that courage still mattered even in the face of extinction. They armed every ship that could still fly, turned science vessels into gunships, and called every colony to arms. But the Zorak kept coming. For every Tiveran ship destroyed, 10 more Zorak ships appeared. The war dragged on for months, and the Tiveran's once proud civilization began to crumble. Entire continents went dark. Their communication arrays failed. Food and medicine ran short. Families hid in underground shelters while the sound of orbital bombardments thundered above. The Tiveran High Council met in the ruins of their capital, surrounded by holographic maps covered in red. Every report was worse than the last. One general said, "We cannot hold another week." Another whispered, "Then we must find hope beyond our stars." It was then that the council made a desperate decision. They would send out a galactic distress signal, a call for help that would travel faster than light to every corner of known space. It was a simple message translated into 100 languages. To any civilization who hears this, help us. We are dying. It was more than just a transmission. It was a cry from the heart of a dying world. The engineers worked day and night to build a powerful transmitter. It stood at the center of their last surviving city, powered by the planet's core reactor. As they activated it, the ground trembled from distant explosions. The sky flashed with burning debris from destroyed ships. Soldiers stood outside the transmitter dome, defending it with what little ammunition remained. Inside, the chief technician, a weary old Tiveran named Solon, entered the final code. The beacon began to glow, sending waves of light and sound into the void. For a long moment, no one spoke. The council members stood in silence, listening to the soft hum of the signal. They knew it might never be answered. Most advanced civilizations avoided war zones, and those that didn't were usually predators like the Zorak. Still, hope was all they had left. One counselor whispered, "Maybe someone will hear us." Solon replied quietly, "Even if they do." Will they care? Outside the dome, the war continued. The Zorak fleet noticed the signal and redoubled their attack, trying to destroy it before it could spread. But the transmission had already escaped the planet's atmosphere, traveling faster than light, bouncing from relay to relay, reaching deep into the unknown. Within hours, it had crossed hundreds of light years, passing empty worlds, nebulae, and silent satellites. Back on Tiveran Prime, the people waited. Days turned into weeks. The skies were filled with smoke, and the once golden towers of their capital were now blackened skeletons. Many began to lose hope, believing their call had vanished into the void. Children asked their parents if anyone would come. Parents had no answers. The council debated surrender again, but no one could reach the Zorak leaders, only their weapons. Then, something strange happened. Deep space listening posts reported unusual readings, faint echoes in the communication band. It seemed their message had reached farther than they'd ever imagined. Across unknown regions, something was moving, something vast, but the Tiveran had no way to know who or what it was. They could only wait and pray. As the days passed, more sensors picked up signals. They were organized, structured, not random noise. Fleet movements, perhaps. Energy spikes, subspace distortions. It was as if a storm was building in the dark. On the night of the 88th day since the beacon was sent, Solon stood on the observation platform above the ruined city. The stars looked cold and distant. He sighed and said, "If anyone heard us, they must be too far away." But he was wrong. Light years away, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, the distress signal had been detected by a network of deep space receivers. The planet's name was Earth. When the signal arrived, it was weak, broken, almost unreadable, but not lost. Humanity's scientists cleaned the data, decoded the message, and stared at the final line that repeated over and over. "Help us. We are dying." The message reached military command, then the United Earth Fleet, and finally the Global Council. At first there was confusion. Who were the Tavaran? Where was their world? Could the signal be a trap? But as the data became clearer, so did the truth. It wasn't a trick. It was a desperate cry for survival. News spread fast. Across Earth, people watched the decoded footage. The faces of terrified alien families, burning cities, and broken voices begging for help. For a long time, humanity did nothing but watch. Some said, "It's not our war." Others argued, "If we can help, we must." The debate grew fierce. But then, one simple statement from a soldier's letter changed everything. It read, "If we had called for help, wouldn't we have wanted someone to answer?" And so humanity decided to answer. Back on Tivaran Prime, the skies were dark and silent. The people had almost lost hope. The beacon had long since stopped transmitting, its reactor finally gone cold. But beyond the edge of their solar system, hidden in the blackness, the first human ships appeared, emerging from hyperspace like shadows of steel. They came silently, scanning the destruction, calculating positions and preparing for war. The Tevarine didn't know it yet, but their cry for help had awakened a species unlike any other. A species that had survived its own wars, its own chaos, its own end-of-the-world moments. Humanity had heard their call, and humanity was coming. The Tevarin had asked for help. What they would receive was far more than they could ever imagine. When the distress signal from the Tevarin finally reached human space, it was first detected by a massive relay station orbiting Jupiter. The message came through as a broken transmission full of static and distortion, but the words were still clear enough to chill the heart of anyone who heard them. "Help us. We are dying." Within minutes, the signal was verified, decoded, and sent straight to Earth Central Command. The message spread faster than fire through dry grass. Every government, military leader, and scientist was suddenly talking about one thing: the Tavaran. For centuries, humanity had dreamed of finding intelligent life. But no one imagined the first real contact would be a cry for help from a dying world. The footage attached to the message showed cities burning, alien families running for shelter, and the same words repeating again and again. It wasn't a trap, it wasn't a hoax, it was a plea. The Tavaran weren't asking for trade or alliance, they were begging for survival. When the leaders of the United Earth Federation gathered in the Orbital Council Hall, the room was silent for a long time. The recording played on a large screen, showing the destruction of the Tevarine world. The air was thick with tension. Some said humanity should stay out of it. "It's not our war," one delegate argued. "We've just achieved peace on Earth after centuries of conflict. Why risk it now?" Others disagreed. A general stood up and said, "We know what it's like to face extinction. If we turn away, then what kind of species have we become?" The debate went on for hours. The council considered every possibility: the danger, the cost, the unknown enemy. Finally, the chairwoman of the Federation spoke softly but firmly. "If we have the power to stop this suffering and we do nothing, then we deserve the silence that follows." Her words ended the discussion. The decision was made. Humanity would answer the call. Orders went out to the United Earth Fleet, the largest military force ever built. Across shipyards on the Moon, Mars, and Titan, alarms sounded as crews rushed to prepare. Massive starships, some the size of cities, were awakened from standby mode. Engineers worked day and night, testing weapons, calibrating engines, and loading supplies. Medics and humanitarian teams volunteered by the thousands. Every ship carried not only weapons but hope. Food, medicine, shelters, and rescue units. The fleet wasn't just going to fight, it was going to save. Within a week, Earth's orbit looked like a storm of metal and light. Dreadnoughts, carriers, transport vessels, and repair ships floated in formation, gleaming under the sun. Each one bore the mark of humanity's unity, the blue and silver crest of the united Earth. Families gathered in cities across the planet, watching live broadcasts of the fleet preparing to depart. People cheered, cried, and prayed. The world hadn't been this united in generations. For once, every nation stood as one. In the fleet's command ship, the EUS Invictus, Admiral Elena Serrano looked out the window at the blue planet below. She had fought in wars before, but this was different. There was no revenge, no politics, and only purpose. She knew humanity's history was full of blood and mistakes, but maybe, just maybe, this mission could prove that humanity had learned something from its pain. She whispered to herself, "Let's bring them hope." When the countdown began, every ship's engines lit up, casting a bright white glow across the darkness. One by one, the ships aligned their jump drives. The entire fleet stretched across orbit like a chain of stars. Then, with a roar that shook the atmosphere, they vanished into hyperspace. Thousands of vessels disappearing into the void, leaving Earth behind. The people watching from the surface could still hear the thunder of their departure echoing across the sky. For days, the fleet traveled through deep space. They passed nebulae and asteroid belts following the signal's path. Soldiers trained, engineers ran diagnostics, and medics prepared field hospitals inside the transport ships. Some wrote letters home. Others simply stared out at the stars, wondering what kind of beings they were going to meet. No one knew if they'd even make it back alive. But the thought that somewhere out there, an entire species was praying for help, that kept them going. Finally, after a long and tense journey, the Tiverine system came into view. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and what they saw stunned them all. The planet was on fire. Half of its surface was covered in smoke and debris. Space around it was littered with wreckage. Broken ships, shattered satellites, and burning fragments drifting aimlessly. The Zorak fleet was still there, encircling the dying world like vultures. On the command deck of the Invictus, Admiral Serrano watched the scans come in. Multiple enemy signatures. Heavy weapons. No communication channels open, her officer reported. Serrano nodded, her face calm but her voice sharp. Then we'll make our own introduction. The humans sent out one message to the Zorak in all major galactic frequencies. This is the United Earth Fleet. You are attacking a civilian population. Stand down immediately. The reply came back in seconds, laughter. The Zorak commander appeared on the screen, sneering. Who are you to order the Dominion? This world is ours. Serrano looked at him expressionless. Not anymore. Then she gave the order. All ships, engage. The next moment, the sky above Tiverine Prime lit up like a supernova. Human dreadnoughts fired their rail cannons, launching slugs of metal the size of trucks at near light speed. Missiles streaked across space, weaving through enemy formations. Drones poured out of carriers like swarms of angry hornets, tearing through the Zorak ship's shields. The Zorak, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. But humanity had mastered war long before the Zorak ever knew their name. They didn't fight for conquest, they fought to end suffering. And when humans fought for that reason, they became unstoppable. Down on the planet, the Tiverine survivors looked up at the dark sky and saw light, not from bombs this time, but from salvation. Thousands of trails of fire streaked across the heavens as human dropships entered the atmosphere. They thought at first it was another attack. But then the ships slowed, opened their bays, and released rescue pods and relief units. Soldiers in white and gray armor began landing, setting up defenses, medical camps, and communication towers. The Tiverine couldn't believe their eyes. They had expected a few envoys, maybe a handful of scouts. Instead, they were watching an entire army arrive, a storm of steel and light descending with purpose. In orbit, the Zorak tried to retreat, but humanity's fleet surrounded them like an iron wall. The Invictus fired its main cannon once, and an enemy battleship exploded in silence. The remaining Zorak ships panicked and fled into hyperspace. Humanity didn't chase them. The mission wasn't vengeance, it was protection. When the final blast faded and the last enemy ship vanished, The humans held position above the world they had just saved. For the first time in months, the skies of Tavaran Prime were quiet. The war was over, at least for now. The Tavaran people came out from hiding, staring in awe at the massive human ships that filled their skies. To them it looked as if gods of iron had descended from the heavens. They had sent a cry for help, expecting a whisper in reply. Instead, they had summoned a thunder that shook the stars. The Zorak Dominion had ruled through fear for centuries. They had crushed dozens of worlds and erased entire species that dared to resist them. When their scanners picked up the sudden arrival of human ships in the Tavaran system, the Zorak commanders laughed. They had heard of humans before, a young race from a small, unimportant planet. To them, humanity was nothing more than a curiosity, a primitive species playing with technology they barely understood. They expected an easy victory. On their command bridge, the Zorak admiral smirked as he watched the human fleet appear. "Look at them," he said to his officers. "So small, so fragile. They think they can stop us?" His crew joined in the laughter. They saw the human ships, cold gray hulls with strange markings, sharp angles, and glowing engines, but they didn't see danger. They saw prey. Then, for a few long moments, both fleets faced each other in silence. The stars seemed to hold their breath. The Tavaran survivors hiding below could only watch, unsure what would happen next. The humans sent one last message across all frequencies. "Cease your attack and withdraw." The Zorak admiral laughed again and ordered his ships to open fire. Thousands of red plasma bolts streaked across space, crashing against human shields. Explosions flashed like miniature suns. But when the light faded, the human fleet was still there and untouched, silent, steady. Then, without a single warning, the humans answered. The first shot came from the dreadnought EUS Invictus. It fired a railgun slug nearly the size of a shuttle, traveling faster than sound could even exist. When it hit the lead Zorak battleship, the explosion was so bright it turned half the sky white. In that instant, the Zorak's confidence vanished. Their laughter stopped. The humans didn't fire once and wait. They fired again and again, unleashing coordinated strikes that looked like a storm made of light. Missiles with artificial intelligence weaved through debris, chasing enemy ships like living hunters. Drone swarms flooded the battlefield, thousands of tiny machines that tore through Zorak fighters with precision. Human warships moved in perfect synchronization, each one knowing exactly where the others would be, as if they were part of a single living being. The Zorak tried to respond, but their systems began to fail. Their targeting computers went dark, their communications jammed. Human cyber warfare teams had already infiltrated their networks, turning their own systems against them. Whole fleets suddenly lost control of their weapons, engines shutting down mid-battle. Ships collided, spun out of formation, and exploded into clouds of burning metal. Within 10 minutes, half of the Zorak's fleet was gone. The rest tried to retreat, but the humans had already surrounded them. It wasn't chaos, it was discipline. Every move, every shot was carefully calculated. Humanity wasn't fighting with rage or arrogance. They were fighting with focus, determination, and something far more dangerous: purpose. Down on Tavaran Prime, the people hiding in the ruins looked up and saw the night sky turn into day. The bright flashes were so intense that shadows danced on the ground. Some thought it was the end of the world. Others realized, and it was the beginning of their salvation. The Tavaran watched the impossible unfold. The mighty Zorak fleet, the monsters that had destroyed their world, were being destroyed themselves. As the battle in orbit raged, human dropships began descending through the atmosphere. The ground shook as they entered, leaving streaks of light behind. The Tavaran thought the invaders had returned, but these ships were different. They landed in precise formations, surrounding burning cities and destroyed outposts. The hatches opened and soldiers in advanced armor poured out. Their faces were hidden behind black visors, their weapons sleek and quiet. They moved in disciplined units, clearing streets, rescuing survivors, and setting up defenses with robotic speed. Human medics ran toward the wounded, ignoring enemy fire. Engineers rebuilt damaged communication towers using portable forges. Drones scanned for survivors under collapsed buildings. Every action was fast, efficient, controlled. To the Tavaran, it looked like a miracle, or a nightmare wearing the face of mercy. When Zorak ground forces tried to resist, they met something they couldn't understand. Humans didn't fight for power or glory. They fought to protect. When their soldiers entered battle, they didn't scream or boast. They moved like ghosts, silent and unstoppable. Snipers took out enemy commanders before they could give orders. Tanks rolled across the battlefield with shields that absorbed plasma fire. Even when outnumbered, the humans never retreated. They advanced, step by step, methodically, fearlessly. The Zorak soon realized that the humans were not primitive. They were monsters of evolution, survivors of countless wars, a species forged in fire and chaos. Their technology wasn't the most beautiful, but it was brutally effective. Their ships weren't the largest, but they were unstoppable. Their soldiers weren't the strongest physically, but their minds were harder than steel. Within hours, the battle was decided. The Zorak command fleet, the same one that had terrorized entire sectors, was gone. Human ships moved in formation over the ruined world, firing precise bursts to eliminate remaining hostiles. The rest of the galaxy would later describe what happened as the Day of Fire. The Teverine would remember it as the day the sky fought for us. On the bridge of the Invictus, Admiral Serrano watched the battlefield fade into silence. Around her, the officers reported victory after victory. She didn't smile. Instead, she said quietly, "Begin rescue operations. We're not done yet." To her, this wasn't triumph. It was duty. Down below Tevarin, children peeked out from the rubble, seeing human soldiers offering them water and food. For the first time in months, they heard laughter instead of explosions. An old Tevarin elder looked up at the burning sky and whispered, "They came for us." As the smoke cleared, the truth became impossible to ignore. The humans hadn't come to conquer. They hadn't come to demand tribute or territory. They had come to end a nightmare, and they did it with terrifying precision. Every shot fired, every life saved, every city liberated spoke of one undeniable truth. Humanity understood war better than any species in the galaxy. But unlike the Zorak, they didn't love it. They hated it. They used it only when there was no other choice. When the last Zorak ship exploded in orbit, the humans finally stopped firing. The silence that followed felt unreal. The battle was over, but its memory would haunt everyone who had seen it. The Tevarin would tell their children for generations about the day when fire rained from the heavens, and the monsters who once ruled the stars were destroyed by the very species they had called primitive. From that day forward, one truth echoed across the galaxy. Humanity was not a race to be underestimated. They didn't fight for conquest or domination. They fought for justice, for survival, for those who couldn't defend themselves. And when they chose to fight, no force in the universe could stand against them. The Zorak had mocked them, believing humans to be weak and naive. But in less than 10 minutes, their arrogance was erased in fire. The galaxy learned that when humans go to war, they don't fight to win, they fight to end the fight forever. When the last battle ended, silence fell across the stars. The mighty fleets of the Zorak Dominion, once feared across half the galaxy, were gone. Their ships had been shattered into glowing fragments drifting through space. Their planets, their command centers, and their armies had vanished from every map. It was as if the Dominion had never existed. The humans had come, fought, and ended a galactic empire in one campaign. The battlefield was a graveyard of metal. Twisted hulls floated in the darkness, flickering with dying sparks. Among the wreckage, human ships moved slowly, scanning for survivors. They weren't celebrating. There were no cheers, no victory speeches. Humanity didn't see triumph in what they had done. They saw tragedy. Billions of lives, Teverine and Zorak alike, had been lost in the fire. And so, instead of raising flags, the humans began to rebuild. Above Tevarin Prime, massive hospital ships took orbit. From them descended shuttles full of doctors, engineers, and volunteers. Human medics moved across ruined cities, treating the wounded without hesitation. They didn't care who the injured were, Tevarin soldier or Zorak prisoner. If someone was alive, they helped them. Portable hospitals rose overnight from the ashes, powered by generators and stocked with advanced medicine. The Tevarin watched in silence. They had seen the humans destroy the Dominion's fleet with terrifying power, but now they were seeing something completely different: compassion. These same warriors who had burned through the enemy with unstoppable fury were now feeding starving children and rebuilding homes brick by brick. It was confusing at first. The Tevarin didn't know whether to fear or admire them. In one ruined city, a Tavaran elder stood beside a human engineer as they worked together to repair a water system. The elder, his voice trembling, asked, Why do you help us still? You've already done enough." The human looked at him and smiled faintly, "Because help doesn't stop when the shooting ends." That simple answer spread through the survivors like light in darkness. Days turned into weeks. The human fleet didn't leave. They stayed, cleaning up battlefields, neutralizing unexploded weapons, and helping the Tavaran rebuild their world. Soldiers who had fought in the invasion now carried tools instead of guns. They built schools, shelters, and power plants. They buried the dead, not just their own fallen, but the Tavaran and even the Zorak who had died in the war. Every grave was marked, every name recorded. When the Tivarine leaders met with Admiral Serrano, they didn't know what to say. Their world had been saved, but at a terrible cost. "You destroyed an empire for us," one of them said quietly. "You've changed everything. The galaxy will never be the same." Serrano looked tired but calm. "We didn't come to change the galaxy," she said. "We came because someone asked for help." That was enough. But across the galaxy, others were already talking. The fall of the Zorak Dominion sent shockwaves through every government, every empire, every species. For centuries, the Zorak had been untouchable. No one dared challenge them. And yet, a young species from a single blue world had done the impossible. Rumors spread faster than light. Some called the event a miracle. They said humanity was a race of angels, saviors from beyond the stars who had delivered justice to the oppressed. Others were not so kind. They whispered of the Deathworlders, a terrifying name given to humans by those who feared them. They said Earth was a death world, a planet so harsh that only monsters could survive there. To those species, humanity's wrath was proof of their danger. "They wiped out an entire empire," said one alien ambassador in disbelief. "And they did it because someone asked them to?" In the halls of distant galactic councils, debates erupted. Should humanity be welcomed or feared? Were they protectors or conquerors in disguise? No one could agree. Every race that had ever fought a war suddenly reconsidered their alliances. The galaxy's balance of power had shifted overnight, and Earth now stood at its center. Meanwhile, on Tivarin Prime, life slowly began to return. The cities were still scarred, but the sound of rebuilding replaced the sounds of war. Children played again in streets that had once been filled with rubble. Fields were planted, schools reopened, and new lights shone across the skyline. The Tavaran would never forget what they had lost, but they would also never forget who had come when they called. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, a small ceremony took place outside the human command base. Hundreds of Tavaran and human soldiers stood together as the last bodies were laid to rest. The wind was quiet, the sky turning gold and crimson. A human chaplain spoke softly, "May the fallen of every world rest together in peace." Then, without words, both sides bowed their heads. Later, the humans began to withdraw their ships. The mission was complete. They left behind technology, medical supplies, and a promise of continued aid. The last human ship to depart was the Invictus. Before it jumped into hyperspace, it released a massive satellite into orbit, a memorial beacon. It carried the names of every fallen Tavaran, every human, and even the Zorak who had died in the conflict. At the center of it was a simple message written in 2 languages: help asked, help given. When the beacon lit up for the first time, its light could be seen from the planet's surface, shining like a second moon. The Tavaran called it the Star of Promise. It became a sacred symbol, a reminder of both the cost of war and the power of compassion. Parents would take their children outside at night, point to the shining beacon and say, "That is the light of the humans, the ones who answered when no one else did." But the rest of the galaxy couldn't stop talking. Some rulers trembled in fear, wondering what would happen if humanity ever turned its fleets toward them. Others reached out to form alliances, desperate to be on the same side as the Deathworlders. Historians called it the Age of Caution, a time when no one dared provoke Earth. Every distress call, every political conflict, every border skirmish now carried a single unspoken question: will the humans get involved? In the shadows, intelligence networks collected reports of human technology, their tactics, and their weapons. But no matter how much they studied, no one could understand one thing: why humans fought so fiercely for people who were not their own. To most of the galaxy, war was about territory, resources, or revenge. But humanity's war for the Tevarin had been different. They had fought out of empathy. They had destroyed an empire not to gain power but to protect the weak, and that made them unpredictable and unstoppable. On Earth, when the fleets returned, there were no parades or grand celebrations. The humans mourned their dead quietly. The soldiers went home to families who would never fully understand what they had seen. The leaders of the United Earth Federation released a simple statement: "We did what was right." The story of the Tevarin spread through the stars for generations. Some retold it as a story of hope, others as a warning, but everyone remembered how it ended, with an entire empire gone and a single truth left behind. The Tevarin had asked for help, never imagining what would come. They expected saviors. What they received was something far more powerful: the fury and compassion of a species that had learned the meaning of both mercy and war. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity answered a call for help and changed everything forever. Many years passed after the war that had shaken the galaxy. The flames of battle had long faded, and the stars above Tevarin Prime once again shone peacefully. The humans were gone, their fleets having returned to Earth decades ago, but they had left behind something greater than any weapon or machine. Floating quietly in orbit above the Tevarin homeworld was a monument, vast, shining, and silent. It carried no flag, no emblem of victory, and no speech carved in stone. There were only 4 simple words written in both human and Tevarin script: help asked, help given, that was all. Yet somehow those words carried the weight of everything that had happened: the fear, the fire, the sacrifice, and the hope. It wasn't just a memorial. It was a message to the galaxy. Anyone who saw it understood that these words were more powerful than any army. Over the years, the monument became sacred to the Tevarin people. Pilgrims from across the planet came to see it, traveling from distant continents just to look up at the great silver shape glinting against the stars. No one ever touched it. No one dared. It was said that the humans had built it to last for 10,000 years, powered by self-repairing systems and guarded by drones that still silently orbited nearby. But it was more than a monument. It was a promise frozen in time. Every Tevarin child grew up learning the story behind those words. Teachers spoke of how long ago their ancestors had cried for help, desperate and dying while the rest of the galaxy ignored them. Empires had turned away. The Zorak Dominion had laughed at their weakness. And then came the humans, strange beings from a distant death world, who answered not with negotiation but with fleets, courage, and fire. In the classrooms of Tevarin Prime, holograms would show the old battles, human ships descending through the clouds, the night skies lit by plasma fire, and the great dreadnoughts hovering above the ruined cities. The teachers always told their students, remember this: they fought not for conquest but for justice. They asked for nothing in return but peace. The children listened with wide eyes, their hearts filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. Generations passed, but the story of Earth's intervention never faded. It became legend, retold in songs and carvings in the very architecture of the Tevarin cities. Statues of humans and Tevarin standing side by side could be found in every capital. In the center of their rebuilt capital stood a large plaza known as the Square of Mercy, where a flame burned day and night, symbolizing the bond between the two species. No one let it go out. For the Tevarin, humanity was not just a race from another world. They were guardians, protectors, the ones who came when no one else did. They believed that the spirit of Earth still watched over them from the stars. Many of their festivals honored both their ancestors and the friends of the Blue World, as they called humans. And every year, on the anniversary of their liberation, they looked to the sky and recited those 4 words together. Help asked, help given. But the story didn't just stay on Tevarin Prime, it spread. Traders, diplomats, and travelers carried it across the galaxy, telling it to anyone who would listen. The tale of the humans, the Deathworlders who brought both mercy and wrath, reached every corner of the stars. On faraway worlds, in places where humans had never set foot, people whispered about them. Some told the story as a warning: do not provoke Earth. If they come, they will end you. Others told it as a prayer: if we ever fall, may the humans hear us. The words carved on the monument became famous throughout space. They appeared in alien art, literature, and even in speeches given by leaders of other civilizations. Those 4 words became a symbol of hope and fear, 2 sides of the same coin, because everyone who heard them knew what they meant, that when humanity gave its word, the universe itself seemed to change. Across the stars, powerful empires began to take notice. Some feared humanity's growing influence. Remembering the stories of the Zorak's annihilation, they studied the humans' technology, their tactics, and their psychology, trying to understand what made them so dangerous. But what truly frightened them wasn't their weapons, it was their heart. Because unlike most species, humans didn't fight for gain. They fought for promises, for people, for principles, and that made them unpredictable. Other races, especially those living under oppression, began to look toward Earth with longing. They sent envoys hoping to form alliances, treaties, and friendships. They believed that if ever they were in danger, the humans might come for them too. Some even painted the monument's phrase on their ships and cities as a silent wish for protection. Meanwhile, on Earth, the story was remembered differently, with quiet pride and humility. The veterans who had fought in the HFY War grew old. Many passed away, their medals gathering dust in family homes, but their grandchildren grew up hearing about the day humanity stood against an empire not to conquer, but to defend. In human history books, the war was not listed under victories or campaigns. It was written simply as the HFY aid mission. To Earth, it wasn't about glory. It was about keeping a promise. Every few years, a human ship would return to HFY Prime to check on the monument. They never stayed long, never made speeches. They would clean the orbit, maintain the systems, and leave quietly. Once, an old HFY priest met the human captain of one such ship. He asked her, "Why do you still come after all these years?" The captain smiled softly and said, "Because we said we would." That answer spread as quickly as the original phrase. And soon, both lines became part of the legend. Help asked, help given, and because we said we would. Together, they defined what it meant to be human in the eyes of the galaxy. In the centuries that followed, the phrase became something like a universal proverb. On distant colonies and alien worlds, people would use it in times of hardship. When someone risked everything to save another, they'd say, "Help asked, help given." When someone kept their promise even when it cost them dearly, those words would be whispered again. It became a moral compass, a reminder of honor and empathy in a universe that often forgot both. But not everyone saw it as pure legend. In the shadows of forgotten worlds, surviving remnants of the old Zorak dominion still told the story with bitterness. To them, those words were a curse. They spoke of humans not as heroes but as destroyers, beings who burned empires to ashes in the name of justice. Yet even they could not deny the truth. When humanity gave its word, nothing in the galaxy could stop them. One quiet night, long after the last human ship had left HFY space, a group of children lay on a hill, staring at the bright light of the monument in orbit. One of them asked softly, "Do you think they'll ever come back?" Another smiled and said, "They don't need to. They already did what they came for." The monument continued to shine above them, eternal and unmoving, a silent witness to both war and peace. And across the stars, countless worlds remembered the same lesson, a lesson carved not in stone but in fire and compassion. When humans promise to help, they bring both mercy and wrath. They heal and they destroy. They save and they fight. Because when Earth answers a cry for aid, it doesn't come halfway. It comes with everything it has, its heart and its fury together. And that is why, even after centuries, the galaxy still looks to the stars and remembers the story of HFY Prime, the day when humanity proved that kindness can burn brighter than any sun.